The last two scenes I made were pretty dark and grim, so scary or no. So I wanted to mix it up a bit and make something relaxing instead. So I went on Pinterest and picked out a couple of references, with this one being the main inspiration. Then I jumped into Blender and started by making the lake, trying out different noise textures for the displacement, and actually got some pretty cool and wonky looking results. Like this one. It doesn't look like water, but I thought it was pretty cool. Anyway, I eventually got the lake looking how I wanted, so I moved on to playing with some volumetrics and the lighting. This setup took extremely long to render though, so later in the video I'll show you how you can fake the volumetrics without losing any of the things that make volumetrics so great. In the reference we can see that there are these cliffs in the distance, so that's what I made next. First I tried to sculpt some cliffs using some rock brushes I got from BlendSwap, and that did kind of work, but when I tried baking the detail I sculpted into a texture, it kind of went south. So I thought, just kind of gave up and went with the Ian Hubert route instead. What I mean by that is I searched some images of cliffs, cut the cliffs out and then just plopped them into the scene, which actually looked pretty good. Next I wanted a little island with trees on it, so I just sculpted the shape and adjusted the location until I liked the placement. Then I made some Japanese maple trees using the sapling tree gen add-on. Actually, while creating these trees I found out that if you increase the levels in the branch splitting section to 3, it'll drastically improve how the trees look, at least for the trees that I'm making. Once I had some materials applied to the trees, I placed them throughout the scene, and that made the scene look pretty good actually. Then I went back to the lighting and tried out a couple of different configurations until I landed on this one here, which I kept for now, but I always go back to adjusting the lighting sporadically throughout the process. Now I felt it was time to make the character along with the paddly thing that she stands on, so I just modeled the paddly thing, nothing interesting there, and then got a placeholder character from Mixamo along with a rice farmer head that I imported using this actually very helpful Sketchfab add-on. Later I'll replace the character with one I made myself, but for now I just imported the model into the scene and moved it around until the head was at about this point where it obeys the rule of thirds, which means that the head of the character, the first focal point, is at this point on the left side, and this tree in front of the sun, the second focal point, is at this location on the right side, which will hopefully balance the image out. Then I added some falling leaves because I thought it would look nice. At first it was way too much, and I also had trouble getting the particle system to loop. By the way, did I mention this animation will be a perfect loop at the end? So yeah, I reduced the amount of the leaves a lot, and that made it look a lot more natural. After that I did a test render and wrote myself a to-do list of the things I still want to do. So I worked on the to-dos, modeling the basket, tweaking the lighting again. I also wanted to add a bird into the scene, but the selection of free 3D models was, let's say, lacking.
Oh my god!
So I went on Pixabay or Pexels.com and searched out a video of a bird flying. Then I stabilized the bird to always stay in the center of the frame and cut it out so it had a transparent background. Because then I can just place a plane with the bird video on it in the scene, animated flying at the right speed, which actually worked way better than I expected. After that I also added a fish I got from the Sketchfab add-on to jump out of the water, which looked pretty weird because it was lacking any kind of splash. Now the way I added a splash is pretty smart, I'd say. Let me explain. To get the splash you have to set up a new Blender file with the exact same lighting conditions, then simulate an object splashing into water, render the splash with an orthographic camera and a transparent background, which will then result in a splash image sequence that you can just use in the scene without making it any heavier. Then I moved on to replacing the character, and I can't really make one from scratch. So I used an add-on called Charmorph and just generated a character using the Asian character type with default settings. Then I modeled the clothes and simulated them, which didn't work. So I simulated them again and again and again and so on for a couple of hours, but now it kind of works. It's still pretty jittery, but from afar you barely notice it. The last thing I have to do is to optimize the scene, because currently a single frame takes about 6 minutes to render, and it isn't even a clean render. So I tried a lot of things. I tried denoising each pass by itself and adding them back together. That didn't work. I tried super image denoiser. Didn't work. I tried the optics denoiser. I tried temporal denoising. I even tried rendering in Octane. Nothing worked. So the volumetrics sadly had to go. But I didn't want to lose any quality. So here's how I managed to keep the volumetric effect but losing the render time. First I removed all actual volumetrics from the scene. Then I added some translucent planes that had about the color I wanted the volumetrics to be and added them into the scene in layers. So one in front of the cliffs, one in front of the island, and a cube that covers the entire scene with an emission shader plugged into the volume output to contribute a base layer of volumetrics. Now this is still missing a couple of things, most notably God rays and that glow. So we will add those in the compositing stage. Take the environment pass and feeding it through a sunbeams node, then overlaying it on top of the render. The glow can be achieved by just using a glare node set to fog glow with a really low mix factor. I also wanted to add a bit more mist, so I used the normalized Z depth pass to add a bit more fog. And all in all, I liked this version better than the one that used real volumetrics. But even better, now we can render a much cleaner version in about 36 seconds per frame. But I'm not done yet. To reduce the render times even further, I had another trick up my sleeve, which is Rive Video Interpolation AI. I'm sure you have seen it by now, implemented in software like Flow Frames, but if not, it's an AI that lets you render your animation at a lower frame rate and interpolates the missing frames. But now the final animation is done, so here it is.